Welcome to Agents in Action with Todd Smith. This is the show to give real estate agents education and inspiration to be an agent in action. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and I'm here with the founder of Premier Real Estate Academy, Todd Smith. Hello, Todd.
Hi, Jody. Hey, how you doing? How's everybody? Great to be here.
Todd, it's always good to hear from you. Now, we've got an interesting topic. At least I think it's interesting because I just recently sold a house, and you're really going to tackle a thing that I think a lot of sellers like myself believe, and you're going to push back pretty hard against it.
Well, good thing we're not in the same room, right? Might actually end up getting into some kind of a physical altercation.
Well, I don't know if we would go that far, but maybe we'll have a lively discussion here.
Absolutely.
Well, the topic is the idea that many sellers like to start high. They like to set the sales price of their house high to leave room for negotiation. And maybe this is a spoiler, but Todd does not agree with that. So Todd, tell us why.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what's going on here, Jody, is that it's just common nature for human beings to think that they have always got to negotiate and to leave that room for negotiation. So this is an objection that we often get when we're out on listing appointments. And I thought today what we would do is we would just go ahead and address one approach that's worked really well for me over the years and kind of go through a role play. And as I said, it's a common misconception that sellers, when they're listing their home, that they think they need to do this. And in fact, time on the market is the number one enemy of a seller. And historically, we know that the longer a home sits on the market for sale, the softer the price becomes. And as I said in the episode today, what I want to do is share one of these approaches that's worked really well for me in these situations. And should you decide to incorporate this into your business or not, the main purpose of discussing this is to be sure that you have your plan, your go-to script, and how you plan to handle this. And of course, handle it however you prefer. But here's what we know. It's going to come up. It's going to come up over and over again. So the stronger we can be, the more prepared we can be, the more effective we're going to have the outcome that we ultimately desire, is to make sure that we get the right price, because it is definitely the difference between taking a listing and having the listing actually sell.
Okay, so let's take a look at some of the thoughts that go with this. We'll begin with sellers' thoughts. Why do sellers might do this? Because it kind of makes sense from the seller's point of view. I know you don't agree with it, Todd. You think it's the wrong way to go, but it does make a lot of sense to a seller. Why does a seller want to put a home on the market with a higher price?
Well, I think that seller also realizes that in times of their own life that they've been a buyer for whatever it is that they were in the market for, and that they've negotiated, that they've wanted to get a better deal. So I think that one of our, I would say it's a weakness that we have, is that sometimes we take what we think and we, of course, then superimpose or we forecast or project that out onto other people to think, well, if I thought that way, then they're going to think that way. But I think we would all agree that it is pretty normal. It's pretty human nature, if you will, that people want to negotiate. And I think the best example, Jody, that I have used over the years is if you're out buying a car, it's expected that you're going to negotiate, right? And if you're out looking for, whatever the make and model, if that dealership isn't willing to do the deal, the odds are you can drive within 20 to 30 minutes in any direction if you live in a larger city, and you can find another dealership and approach them with the deal. And if they're not willing to do it, you could probably drive another 30 minutes. You can see where I'm going. And eventually someone's willing to do the deal. However, in real estate, it's not a car, obviously, and it's the only one of a kind. I mean, that house is sitting on that property in that specific physical location, and there are no two alike. And I think that's why when we really understand our market statistics, we understand what's going on in our economy. We're working with a seller and we understand their motivation. We know what buyers in the community, buyers agents in the community, our expectations, what's going on. Then we really are in a position to price the home and bring the peace of mind to the seller that, in fact, you don't have to do that. And that asking less is actually more in most cases.
Let's look at some of the things that buyers think. We examined why a seller might think this, but let's look at some of the things buyers think when they're taking into consideration the length of time a home they're interested in has been on the market. Because Todd, you said that is a bigger factor than we might think it is. So of course it depends on the market conditions.
Sure.
But what else do buyers think when they're looking at a home and it's been on the market for a few days versus 60 days versus perhaps longer?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we first look at when a home has just been listed just a few days, typically, and of course there's many, but just a couple of the top things that a buyer might be thinking is, of course, I would need to act fast. There may be multiple offers on this property. And of course, that's all depending on the market that you're in right now, but that isn't uncommon in many different markets across the country. Another thought they might have is the seller is less likely to be flexible on price. And, they might even wonder if there's already been offers submitted on the property. So all of these are setting a buyer up to have urgency, to take action and make a strong offer. So obviously the flip side is, what would a buyer possibly be thinking when the home has been listed for a longer period of time? In this case, as you said, maybe 60 days, couple months, because of course in a seller market, that would be a longer amount of time. And of course, in that case, they're going to be thinking things like, is there anything wrong with the house? I bet if we do make an offer, we'd be able to get a better deal. And they might be thinking about, I have time to think about it. The urgency's gone away. Maybe we can go out and look at some other homes before actually making a decision. And of course, all of these do not encourage urgency, and it leads the buyer, if they should make an offer, to usually make a weaker or a lower offer.
Okay, let's set this up, Todd. Give us key ideas that we'll want to keep in mind.
Yeah, so the idea here, when we're talking scripts in general, is we want to know our outcome. What is the outcome that we're looking to create? And how can we create conversation that will lead us to that outcome? We want to let the seller come to the realization that pricing it right from the start is the best choice. So when I'm writing a script or when I'm thinking about how would I approach this conversation, is what questions could I be asking that would lead that seller down the path to pricing their home right? Now, that's a big thing, because a lot of the times in sales, we think selling is telling. Selling is asking great questions and letting whomever you're speaking to self-discover the answer. Because if it's their idea, of course, and I mean this with all due respect, then they're a genius. But if it's our idea, they tend to resist and sometimes they'll push back, right? So what questions will lead them to that decision? And here's the last point, is that if we don't believe it, Jody, if we don't ourselves believe it, what we're saying, what's the right thing to do, neither will they. So what I think we could do now is maybe go into like that conversation, and maybe we could role play that just as an example. And again, this is just an example. This is just one of many ways. I have just found this to be very effective, so I wanted to share it with everyone today.
Okay, well, let's do that, because I think these examples, when you give scripts or when we role play, comes in so handy, because you hear what it sounds like to have this conversation and where it might go. So I'm going to start this off, Todd, as the seller.
Perfect. Yeah. And our goal is just to set up the, scenario, if you will, is that the market, the data, and all the details are clearly telling us that, right in the mid 300s is where we need to be priced. Ideally, right around 350. So that's what we're kind of going to take this role play as a basis. Okay.
So I'll begin. You and I are having conversation perhaps at my home, and I tell you, well, it looks like we need to price our home around 350,000. So let's start a bit higher so we leave room to negotiate. Let's put it at 370 so the buyer feels like they're getting a better deal when they do get it at 350.
Yeah, Jody, that makes sense. And I would understand why you'd feel that way. It would be pretty normal, I would think, to think that way. After all, when you go to buy something, it's only natural that we want to get a better deal if at all possible, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So let me ask you a question, Jody. I don't know if you've given this any thought, but just something to consider. If asking a higher price would actually end up costing you more money, in other words, you would walk away with less profit if you did that, I'm sure that's something that you would want to know about, wouldn't you?
Yeah, of course, but I don't really know what you mean.
Well, may I explain?
Please.
Okay. So, Jody, let's look at a couple scenarios. So a buyer looks at your home. Let's say they're really excited, and of course they want to make an offer. I mean, that's what we want to see happen. So what do you think if you're a buyer? Now put yourself in the buyer's shoes, working with the buyer's agent, right? What do you think one of the top questions that a buyer is going to ask their agent about the listing? And of course, again, they're at this point where they're interested in writing an offer. Now they already know the price, right? I mean, that's pretty normal. They already know the size, the bedrooms and the bathrooms, all the basic things about the property. What do you think some of the questions might be the buyer asks their agent?
Is there any other offers? That might be a good one.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I definitely think that's something that a buyer would ask. What else comes to mind?
How long has the home been for sale?
That's exactly it. That's the question. And in fact, I think that's one of the most important questions, Jody, and here's why. Let's look at two scenarios. Scenario A says this. The buyer asks the agent, so how long has the home been listed on the market? And the agent says 2 days. So what do you think the buyer's mindset is likely to be?
Well, I would imagine they'd be thinking they need to make an offer quickly.
Right. They would have urgency. This is what we want, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, what else do you think they might be thinking?
Well, maybe that they need to make a stronger offer because it just came on the market.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we want them to think, right?
Yeah, that's what I'd want them to think.
Okay. So Jody, let's look at the second scenario. Let's call this scenario B. The buyer asks their agent, so how many days or how long has the home been listed for sale or on the market? And the agent says 62 days, just as an example. What do you think the buyer's mindset at that point is likely to be?
Well, I'm going to wonder why it's been for sale 62 days. Maybe there's something wrong with it.
Absolutely. And that wouldn't be good, would it?
No.
What else? I mean, what else comes to mind? You're a buyer, 62 days. What else comes to mind?
Well, I might think I'm going to get a better deal because it's been for sale for a little while.
Exactly. So this is what I'm talking about when I mentioned a moment ago that if you knew asking more could leave you that negotiating room, but it could actually end up costing you money, not making you money. And of course, you want to maximize your profit, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So Jody, this is what we have to figure out. What is the most dominant thought that you want your buyer prospects to have? A, I need to make a better offer. I need to make it now. I need to make a strong offer because if I don't, someone else will. Or B, let me think about it. If I do end up making an offer, maybe I'll be able to come in a little bit lower to see if there's any room for negotiation so I can get a better deal. What thought do you ultimately want the buyer to hold on to in their mind? A or B?
A.
Exactly. You're right. That's exactly what I would pick too. So based on that, what is the price based on the facts and the data that I've presented to you today? What is going to cause a buyer to choose to make an offer on your home versus the competition? Where would we need to be positioned in the market?
Well, I guess it's probably better to be closer to 350. So let's go with 355.
I think that's a wise decision. So we'll do that. We'll start at 355. And I'm pretty sure based on what we went over today, there's going to be a really good response to that price. We'll get your home on the market, actually get it sold so that you can move to, and then of course, wherever they're destined to go. So that's kind of the end of the role play. Keeping in mind that this is not going to work perfectly every time, but I have found that this is very effective, that when you can allow the seller to self-discover how to make the right decision on price and get it right the first time. So the key here is not to take the words exactly as I use them. That's the way I do it. And of course, unless that works for you, the key here is to grasp the concept of the conversation, practice it, read it, go over it, take your notes, and then of course, attempt to do it on your own and eventually run through the scenario from memory. And if you think about it, it's a pretty simple scenario. Seller wants to price high. We know that's a challenge. We ask them a question that causes doubt. If you knew doing that would actually work against you, not in your favor, you'd want to know, right? Yes. Then you ask them, well, what's the buyer going to think about a home that sits on the market for 2 days, for 62 days? Which thought do you want them to hold on to? And then what's the best thing we should do based on that? It's a very simple script and it's been very effective. So I just wanted to share that today. And I truly hope that that's something that is of value to you when you're out on your listing appointments.
Well, Todd, this was great. I know these scripts really help people out, hearing the role play, how it works. Todd, I'm stepping out here, so you can swap me back down if you want. But if there's any situations, any scripts you would like to hear from Todd, just reach out and let us know, and Todd will work that up for you. Todd, I'm making promises for you.
Yeah, no, I'm open to that. I'm open to that idea. And of course, I think the biggest thing there is we tend to go down a path sometimes with scenarios that I don't have, at least later in my career, happen a lot because I'm working with qualified prospects. In other words, when I'm out a lot with agents, Jody, at training events, and they'll bring up scenarios and it it'll sometimes immediately throw me for a loop, and I'll be like, gosh, what would I say to that? And then I reflect on it and I think, well, that would never happen if you were in front of a qualified seller. So my point in saying that is, if those things that you might be thinking would be the legitimate concerns or objections, or how you would like to hear me speak to those things, absolutely, I'm happy to address them, but I wouldn't be able to address all of them. Some of them don't really happen. They only happen because we're in front of people that we really shouldn't be presenting to, if that makes sense.
That's a great answer, Todd, because you have preached ever since we started doing this show about how important it is to qualify people.
It's huge. It's everything. It's everything. And for some reason, as an industry, we're working on improving those skills and doing that on more of a consistent basis. But everything that I would share would mean, of course, this script today, for example, really is only going to be as effective as the quality of the lead that I'm presenting to. So if they're highly motivated, this is going to work. Of course, if this person is just kicking the tires, doesn't really have to move, then this logic probably isn't going to be as effective.
All right, Todd, now you have some more live events coming up. Tell us about those.
Yeah, so it was really exciting. Just a few weeks ago, we did the first Certified Residential Buyer Specialist Workshop. It was awesome to spend the day with the agents talking specifically how to work with buyers at a higher level, how to get loyalty, deliver our value proposition, and to basically stop working for free. Because, you know, in the industry, when you work with a seller, tend to be by a listing agreement and some formal commitment. And for some reason, again, one of those things that's always kind of made me wonder why, but our industry works with buyers, and sometimes we're just out working with buyers without any kind of formal commitment. So that was a really great day. And speaking of great days, we have a couple events coming up, one on March 28th and 29th. We will be in Plano, Texas, doing the Certified Residential Listing Specialist Workshop. And then on April 5th, we'll be back in the Arlington area doing the Certified Residential Buyer Specialist Workshop. And then a few weeks later, the week of April 17th, we need an exact date. We're working on nailing that down right now, Jody, but I'm going to be back in Plano about 3 weeks after that listing specialist event, offering the buyer specialist event. So the agents have been very gracious in their feedback. They've shared with me that this is tremendous value to them, really helping them understand what it is that they could be doing so that they can be closing more business, but not just closing more business, but doing it in a more efficient timeline so that we can, of course, increase our productivity.
All right. Looking forward to it, Todd. And thank you so much for another great episode. And thank you for listening to Agents in Action.